spot. I'm feeling good. The sun is shining. I knew it would. The world's a playground. I'm in the clouds. Let me show you what it's all about. Check it out. I'm gonna light it up. Yeah, I'm gonna light it up. Check it out. I'm gonna light it up. Yeah, I'm gonna light it up. Just check it out. I'm gonna light it up. Yeah, I'm gonna light it up. Let me show you what it's all about. Check it out.
If he dies, you die. There's your job.
I'm on the big stage. I got my crew. I'll get you moving. It's what I do. The party's starting. It's going down. Let me show you what it's all about. Check it out. I'm gonna light it up. Yeah, I'm gonna light it up. Check it out. I'm gonna light it up. Yeah, I'm gonna light it up. Just check it out. I'm gonna light it up. Yeah, I'm gonna light it up. Let me show you what it's all about.
Good afternoon. Due to the large number of extremely biased, in my opinion, reviews, I decided to set up my own. Attention. And finally, even though I'm trying to be objective, there will be a lot of exclusively my subjective opinion. I want to apologize in advance to the orthographer-punctuacophiles that I could, did, but don't expect much. And so, I would like to start with a small retrospective, literally the last 4 years. What notable ARPGs have seen the light during this time? We had Dragon Age, Inquisition, which could have been a good game, but, unfortunately, the merged villain, the dominance of the grind, and an extremely unbalanced combat system left only negative impressions of the game. The motto of the game I would make, "Hey, Inquisitor. My chickens need a new grain, hurry up." Next was The Witcher 3, Wild Hunt, without exaggeration a great game. That's just the opinions about her genre affiliation were divided. I am one of those users who consider it an action game with RPG elements, and not an ARPG in the usual sense. Let me explain. The game has excellent quests, side and main tasks are closely intertwined, which creates a feeling of a huge dense adventure. But the gameplay of this game has nothing to do with ARPG, all interaction with the world comes down to the word or steel silver. The world itself is a decoration created to create the illusion of life, and within the framework of quests it works perfectly. While you are flying from marker to marker, the world is completely plausible, people are busy with their own affairs, sometimes they react to Geralt. But it's worth stopping and taking a closer look. There is no gameplay freedom in the game, and all the abilities that our character teaches change the style of play, and in general the gameplay is very insignificant. I understand that this is due to the setting of the game and the main character, but, I'm sorry, I can't call this approach a good full-fledged ARPG. Fallout 4 is next in line. It's also a good game, here I express my opinion, remember, right? This game has its own number of disadvantages. The gameplay part wins in it, but the plot and quests sink quite a lot. They are as linear as possible. If you were told to go to point B and take item A, and then return it to point C, then that's exactly what you will do. Without any choice. The game leaves the choice only for how the player gets to point B and picks up item A. You can steal stealth, you can break in loudly with a machine gun, you can arrange a sniper duel, you can hack the nearest robots so that they do all the work for the player, etc. And it turns out the opposite situation to The Witcher, a great variety of gameplay, the ability to interact with the environment, but the almost complete lack of interactivity in the quest component, which again prevents me from perceiving the game as a full-fledged good ARPG, where I'm used to getting both gameplay and plot freedom. And the retrospective ends with a game from the Iron Islands, Mass Effect, Andromeda. Let's move on. And so we got to Elex. What did the 30 Germans who made this brainchild for many years give us for 6 rolls and 12 bottles of beer a month? I will say right away, the best ARPG, the most correct ARPG, the most honest ARPG on the current generation of consoles. So, the haters went to write comments or close the post altogether, so I can list the minuses of the game. Cons of the game. The biggest disadvantage of the game is the technical component. For such a performance of the project, I would take away at least 2 knuckles from the 2P1s. Inventory starts opening slower and slower as the game session progresses. By the end of the 5 to 6 hour session, I spent 30 to 40 seconds to open the inventory. Shit coders, fuck 'em. Well, how can you? Restarting the game helped, but this is unacceptable, as for me. Then there are FPS drawdowns. Sometimes I played at a stable 3 to 5 frames per second, again, the restart saved. But the sediment remained. You can decide that my screen is broken or the card is burned, but no, this charm is in the game itself. It is treated by rapid movement. Further, although it relates to the technical part, but I will highlight it separately. Sound. The music in the game lives its own life, can arise suddenly, also suddenly disappear. On some surfaces there is no sound of footsteps, walls around the converters, there is often no sound of rain or it is too quiet. At first I thought it was a graphic bug, there is a rain effect, but there is no sound. Sometimes the music of the battle began to play after the end of the battle, lasted 5 to 10 seconds and stopped. Sounds of falling water, wildly loud near, almost inaudible 5 to 10 meters away. Hitboxes of the player and enemies. Sometimes there was a feeling that the game perceives everyone as knuckles at different sizes, and this is not surprising, to be honest. But when damage passes through you, even though you were already behind the enemy's back by that time, it's unpleasant. Also, the time of receiving damage often does not coincide with the animation of the enemy's strike, you just started lowering the axe, and the damage has already passed. In this situation, the only thing that pleased, or rather saved, was that this chip was the norm for the game, and not a bug, which made it possible to quickly adapt to such a feature. More on this below. Another unpleasant moment of the game is the inventory, and the fact that there is no sorting in it, or I did not find it. I do not deny such a scenario. The main problem of the inventory is that after finding a new item, you need to find it in the inventory so that the god-awful disappears. They infuriate my inner perfectionist, so by the end of the game I had more than 100 notes and books, and each new one made me scroll the list for 10 to 15 seconds. A similar problem existed among merchants, only in an even more neglected form. Let me explain. The player has several sections in his inventory: armor, one-handed, two-handed weapons, firearms, magic, ammunition, herbs, potions, audio recordings, paper recordings, garbage, etc. And in each of these sections there are from 20 to 30 to 100 to 200 items, and when the player turns to the merchant, there are 3 sections of weapons, armor, and so on. And so the rest in this case is inflated to an indecent size. Looking for 1 to 2 minutes for an item for sale in the last third of the game is the norm. This disadvantage is rather my personal one, many may disagree with me. This is the lack of gradations of teachers. Remember how it was in Gothic, when at some point the teacher told you together, "I can't teach you anymore, you know everything I know, you'll have to find someone better." Forget it. There is no such thing here. Any teacher is ready to teach everything in his specialty to the end. Their diversity has also decreased. There is no longer a separate teacher of lockpicking and stealth, a separate melee fighter, a separate teacher of skinning. No, now there is a martial arts teacher, which includes possession of all types of weapons and related abilities. There is a craft teacher, which includes alchemy, jewelry, and improving weapons, and breaking locks, etc. Unfortunately, this leprosy has spread further and infected the places of application of the craft. Now there is no more forging, alchemical table, cooking, no. Now there is a workbench, one faceless workbench, on which you can brew a potion, cut a stone, forge a sword, assemble an automaton, summon a demon, enslave the world, build a Death Star. In a word, a strong simplification of pumping skills, professions and crafting in general. Which, personally, made me extremely sad. The most minor technical problem of the game is the drawing range. And I'm not talking about the vastness of the world now, when you are eager to see the other side from the edge of the map. In this case, the fog is perceived normally, but when you see a bright glowing spot in the cave, you decide that this is the exit, you go to it, and the spot abruptly dissolves into a black wall, and you realize that the game could not draw a 100-meter corridor. This is sad and hurts the eye a lot in large enclosed spaces and cities. The feeling that I really returned to the 2002 game, where such techniques were the norm. And, probably, the last minus, again, for me personally. Low emotionality of the characters. I've been trying for a long time to understand why I was so fascinated by the dialogues in The Witcher 3, and why I can't feel it here. No, not because there are better quests in The Witcher. Reflections led me to the conclusion that in the creation of the Poles, the characters were alive in dialogues. Emotions flowed out of them, often the emotional color of the dialogue changed several times, right there, although the information itself in the dialogues arouses interest, but it does not cling at all on an emotional level. Although this does not apply to all characters and not all quests. The same beast is just an emotion generator. Her monologue, spoiler, when she finds out about the origin of the protagonist, this is what is so lacking in most dialogues. As the game progresses, you somehow begin to sympathize with some characters and dislike others, but if the presentation of the characters themselves were on the level with The Witcher, it would be simply amazing. So, this was what disappointed me in the game. Now it's worth talking about what kept me in the game for 150 hours, and what made me start to go through it, and in general, to do this review. Advantages of the game. The first and most important plus of the game is the plot and end. I admit I didn't expect anything from him, but the more I played, the more he intrigued me. I was very pleased with how the developers tied up a lot of storylines into one single one towards the end. By the end of the game, you realize that nothing in the game was added just to fill the void. Everything was thought out, painted and laid out by the developers with an understanding of what they are doing. The same moments occurred in The Witcher and Fallout, but were much more local. After the final there is something to think about. In the plot itself, I was pleased that the more you learn, the more your attitude to the characters and even to the main villain of the game changes. The plot lacks stars from the sky, the usual one about revenge, but the disclosure is done perfectly, even though the pitch has suffered. The one you wanted to kill at the beginning of the game can become your friend by the end of the game, and who was a friend at the beginning can be killed by the end, and all this depends solely on the personal attitude of the player, his worldview and his decisions. It's not clear until the very end if you're doing everything right, or if all the polymers have already been fucked up. The second plus of the game is the structure of quests, both main and side. Or rather, their variability. Most have 2 to 3 interchanges, while sometimes they are hidden from the player and can only be discovered experimentally. But still, there was something disappointing. This mechanics is not applicable to absolutely all quests. Sometimes you want to turn the quest in the other direction, but it does not have such a mechanism. But such failures were rare for me, although I did not check all 300 plus quests, but only when I did not agree with the path that the quest followed. You can also insert the mechanics of persuasion into this section. It is available to clerics and works on the principle of Axia from The Witcher. That's just the places where it is used and no more than in The Witcher himself, and how I wanted the convince option to burn in all quests and work depending on the strength of the player's intelligence and the NPCs. Oh, dreams. Such nuances not only increase the replayability of the game, but also enliven the game world. The characters and the main character no longer look like hostages of the script, and as soon as such mechanics open, you want to go through each quest several times. Sometimes openly failing quests because you don't agree with what should happen next. Elex is the first ARPG in which I did not take quests, or refused them as I progressed, since they did not have a good outcome. Also, by doing the right thing, you can often run into problems only. There is no clear boundary between good and evil in the game. Many of the characters met, even the heads of the camps and the characters of the main storyline, leave a nasty impression when they first meet. All of them pursue exclusively their own goals. And, to be honest, it's cool. I never thought that I would be glad to see such an approach when you stand, realize that everything is scum around, and decide which scum is still worth helping. And yet I can't help but note the fact that not all characters have a reverse side and depth. Some of them turn out to be what the game draws them in the first dialogue. The character is a cliché, you can call them that. Fortunately, there are few of them, and for the most part they are on the sidelines. The third positive moment for me was the fights. The problems of the combat system have already been mentioned above, now let's talk about its advantages. Firstly, the game requires no less skill from the player than from the character, if not more. Blows should be struck, observing the rhythm. Lost the rhythm, the character freezes for a moment and, most often, gets in the teeth. The rhythm that you need to get into is somewhat similar to the rhythm from the Gothic, only now with a visual indication at first glance. It seems complicated and cumbersome, but in fact everything is extremely simple. After a couple of hours, the player knows how many strokes he has enough stamina, how long to wait after rolling and with what frequency he should strike. Of course, it is worth mentioning that the player will know this only if he understands how the system works, and judging by the reviews, not everyone could understand it. This is also facilitated by the fact that the combat fully works when fighting with a shadow. So it is literally possible and even necessary to train. As the hero is pumping, the endurance also grows, if you pump it, of course, and the rotations change. It becomes easier, mistakes become less critical, you can afford both parrying and rolling, but do not think that the game becomes too simple. I've talked about how the player hits, and now I'll explain in general terms how the enemies act. Let's start with people. Human enemies can do exactly the same as the player. Attack combinations, strike radius, stamina, parrying, changing weapons, all this is in their arsenal, and all this can be used against them in battle. An example is that an enemy can be divided into a series of attacks in which he will selflessly burn all his stamina, after which he will be able to attack or parry without the ability, and will obediently receive damage. It's easier for animals. I haven't noticed that their stamina decreases during an attack, maybe a bug, but their attacks always have a little preparation, which gives them time to react. Also, animals, like humans, have a series of attacks that they cannot interrupt, and as with humans, if you dodge the first attack, you can attack in the back while they lose their series. But if you miss the first one, the chances of getting the whole series to the end are quite high, especially if the first attack caught you without stamina, and such an outcome in the first 10 to 15 hours of the game can become lethal. Also in the game there is the possibility of a counterattack. It works here, as in any other game, it is required to parry in time. In this case, this attack will lead the enemy to a stand lock, which will cause damage. And the last remark about the fight. Elex does not know how to interrupt animations. If you or the enemy started the animation of a strong blow, then he will not be able to interrupt it in any way, but the incoming damage will be interrupted easily. This should always be remembered, since the interrupted blow has already spent stamina, but it did not cause damage. The same goes for food and potions. All this is animated and works exactly the same as in the Soul series. An unsuccessful time to take a potion can lead to loading. Changing weapons also takes time and does not allow you to do somersaults or drink potions. All this makes the fighting slow, if I may say so, and up to a certain point the game is difficult. After the discovery of strong weapons, and even better, AoE weapons, the battles become easier, sometimes even too simple, but only until the first mistake. The fourth point I would mention is peace. A lot of notes revealing small personal stories. A rich NPC daily routine. They can sleep, eat, cook, socialize, walk, smoke, work and go to need. And all this can be included in the rotation of one NPC. There are also night and day guards in the cities, which are replaced. At night, the cities are really deserted, which allows you to steal or kill. Some animals also fall asleep, which also increases the variability of the gameplay. It is also worth noting that animals move around the world, actively fight with each other, attack patrols or traders. Finding the corpses of animals and people when traveling around the world is a common thing. And of course I can't help but mention really dark nights, during which you can't see further than your own nose under the crowns of trees. In such conditions it is extremely difficult to move, since the chance of running into death is very high. I really miss dark nights, they're rare in video games. And the last plus, for me, is the visual design of the game. Or rather, how it looks at night. During the day, this is a very budget schedule. But at night, in the rain or snowfall, the game looks very juicy. What surprised me is that the game has shadows from all light sources, even small lanterns that do not give light, but only illuminate the road like runway lights, and they throw shadows from objects and the player. Also, the light reflects very qualitatively from the water and highlights raindrops. Yes, there is no innovation in this, but I can count games with similar effects on my fingers, especially not from the AAA segment. And I would like to note the magnificent realization of flowing water. You will see for yourself below. What is the result? Given the technical quality of the game, I would say it deserves 7-7.5 points. If you discard the technical part, then the game is on a solid 8 or even 8.5. Cherry. I often hear about bad animations of the game. That they did not go far from the Gothic, Return 2002, that the game is outdated in all aspects. At the same time, I also often hear about the magnificent animations of The Witcher 3. Well,